Germany in Hearts of Iron 4 has and forever will be an emerging superpower. Realistically, they could take any piece of land they wanted. The real question was, could they hold it? The Germans decided in 1936 to not pursue any unneeded conquests, rather to defend their homeland, prepare, and make sure they could be the best they could be. They will focus on superior firepower, advancing their artillery tech, tactics, air power, global projection of power, civilian industry, diplomacy, being a good guy. But 2 years will pass, but things are not looking too hot. The Polish had very clear revanchist policies and needed Silesia back. Alongside stepping up their aggression towards Prussia, they had an elite military force, not even comparable to the Germans. They fought against the Soviets, Lithuanians, Czechoslovakians, Romania. Germany had fought against training dummies. On the other side was France, an ultra-militaristic European superpower hell-bent on taking everything west of the Rhine. What were the Germans even hoping to do? Well, they could fight like a cornered animal against an inevitable two-front war, lose, and then commit to a mass insurgency, making the lives of any garrison man an absolute nightmare. They could also cede territory to either side and only focus on one enemy and hopefully win. But not even that was guaranteed. Or they could invade the Danube Pact. It formed as a counterbalance to Polish aggression, but now sits completely isolated from the rest of the world. Half of the land the pact encompasses could be well integrated into Germany, and the resources from these free countries would go a long way in reinforcing the nation. On top of the most important aspect of this hypothetical victory, the widening of Silesia, preventing an encirclement the Polish will no doubt go for. Well, the Germans started preparing. The mountainous terrain in Czechoslovakia and Austria was obviously going to be double trouble. Soon enough, little grey men would mass along the Sudetenland, and war was declared. The plan was to go through the green area and open up Prague. The Czechs would capitulate and there'd only be flat terrain and forests in the way of the German army. Taking the green line wasn't too difficult, and the Germans even encircled 8,000 men in Aussieg. But when they reached Prague, the Czechs had set up a defensive line that, through probing attacks, was judged to be almost impossible to break through. The Germans wanted to keep this low profile. They had to go elsewhere. Thankfully, an emergency plan by a member of the general staff already existed. A plan to go through North Austria and circle back to Brno. It was instantly put into action, and Linz and Salzburg were taken within weeks. But the Germans hit another wall. The front line was stretched, the goal fortified, and the plan bearing no fruit. The Germans were doing amazing in a war where they were prioritizing as little casualties as possible, but the last stretch was going to need a lot of bodies. It wasn't even clear if it was worth to do this, but it seemed like the only option.
You've got mail.
Oh! The Danube Pact had an interesting peace deal for Germany. Don't take anything, and you help us invade Poland. Czechoslovakia needs its shit back. The Germans took it instantly, and a ceasefire went underway. All land was returned to the Danube states, and the now four nations began slowly plotting their plan for a joint invasion of the Pink Panther. The Nubians had one simple request: help us with your mountaineers. That's it. You don't need to join the war, we can handle this ourselves. We'll take care of Poland. Germany agreed to this. Their plan was to keep the Polish and the Nubians occupied in a never-ending war, as they prepared for the French. Their plan consisted of heavy military buildup, but mostly an extensive line of defense in the Rhine. If they could complete this, they would be set for another generation. As the Danubians walked into Poland, the telegram was received from the French. Take one bit of Polish land, you die. Sure, okay. The Danube Pact was taking back their land at a steady pace with additional Soviet support. There were some tense moments, but in a few months they had all they needed. But they didn't stop. Okay, that they're taking more land. Germany was just used as a tool to get past the Polish mountains. They recalled their volunteers and left the alliance. But France was still building up. Their ally was dying, and the Germans were the sole reason this all had happened. Diplomats to Germany were becoming more and more hostile, and newspapers were spreading more propaganda than usual. Just in case, the German lines were made extra thick near the Maginot, and the general staff just hoped for the best.
You've got mail.
France would begin pushing the Germans out of the Rhine at Mach 10, and immediately annexed the state into France proper. The Germans held very well at the Ruhr River, but landings in the northwest stretched the German army to its absolute limits. the French managed to cross the Ruhr and reached all the way from Karlsruhe to Dortmund. There was a pause, but only for a moment. The next attack came just as hard, but slower. The focus was clearly South Germany now. Consolidated, the French spearhead towards Nuremberg, but the Germans hold it desperately, so the French paused and relocated to the north of Nuremberg, where they only widened the front the Germans were so desperately holding on to. Every single bit of German power was sent to this area. The French paused, and the Germans decided to counterattack this time, and they achieved the first victory in the war. There was something about the pauses in the French attacks that irked the general staff, but they had a hard time figuring it out. Nonetheless, they kept counterattacking every pause even when a division was exhausted from the previous attack. The Germans reached a point, though, where they couldn't break through the lines anymore. The staff had to figure out what was going on behind the French lines. The boys over at Doctrine Analysis hypothesized the lack of modern logistics planning and narrow routes to equip the French army. There was a pause between every major push due to a combination of slow planning and hauling of logistics to the new spearhead. Through subsequent weeks of monitoring, the Germans discovered there were two chains of logistics, defensive and offensive, subdivided into fronts where there were two divisions of offensive logistics, running to the next planned offensive whenever needed. This resulted in a lot of power in each spearhead, but left the French extremely versatile. Near urbanized areas, the defensive division was quite good at repelling attacks, but due to the aforementioned narrowness, the countrysides and wooded areas were observed to be very brittle indeed. Evidently, the French logistics were extremely sensitive to any amount of pressure, and with this knowledge the Germans switched gears to more airplane production, as the air war over South Germany wasn't going too well. The new German model Henkel 130 would definitely go a long way in improving the situation. It was coincidentally designed for logistics bombing actually. The deadline for the first functional model would be 2 months. In the meanwhile, the Germans quickly went to work exploiting their newfound understanding. As the French arrived for round 2 in encircling South Germany, the Germans only put up a token resistance. And as soon as the French took the land, the Germans counterattacked and had a massive victory, weakening the French divisions to the point of inoperability. The second offensive division spearheaded towards Hanover, however, and with another cede of territory, the Germans assaulted the defenses behind the spearhead, almost encircling it. The rout gave the Germans a newfound confidence, and they pushed up all fronts in the north, taking back swaths of land in the countrysides and woods. The Germans were now at Dortmund-Essen, the first logistical fortress right next to Frankfurt that they had to take back in order to win the Western Front. The French were very much still on an aggressive, vicious force, however, and they instead went for the throat directly, managing to take Augsburg and be only one tile away from Munich. Seeing their success, the French decided to gamble everything they had and consolidated all 2 offensive divisions to attack Nuremberg head-on once again. The Germans tried their elastic line tactic, but instead were beaten back and began holding the gates of Nuremberg. If the Germans lost the city, the south would be gone, but that wasn't the French focus. The railways were. With this, the most basic material were cut off from the south, and the French were now hooked underneath Nuremberg. But the German bombers were now online. They began slowly, at first, destroying the logistics in the southern front, but were getting more and more efficient as each day passed. What the Germans observed immediately after this was like a blessing from the skies. The French were completely immobilized in the south, like a rock, and the Germans were free to do whatever they pleased, as every single enemy division was suffering from massive logistics issues. They managed to take Dortmund-Essen after days of siege, and only Frankfurt was still standing. They arrived at the gates of the city, and at last, they met a well-equipped French resistance. But just bombing all the railways leading to the city quickly made it untenable to hold. The Germans were now facing all of the Ruhr River. The French, who had attempted for a month to evacuate the forces and all the equipment, decided to simply leave everything they had and run to the Rhine, which they'd also have to retreat from shortly after. Germans had liberated all of their land, and the French lost all of their offensive capability. Wanting a forever peace with the French, Germany walked into Luxembourg, Metz, and Flanders to force a surrender. In the peace deal, they forced the creation of Walloon Luxembourg, and a non-aggression pact for an indefinite amount of time. They were lenient, really. It didn't matter anyways. They were being gutted from the inside and out. The war was over. In the east, the Poles had been partitioned a while ago now, and the Danubians had no interest in meddling with German affairs. Germany had checkmated Europe.